Hello, everybody, and welcome to the VTT podcast. I'm Abby, and with me today is John. And today we're going to be talking about the change house model. John has got a wealth of knowledge in his head over many, many years' experience of working in the training industry. So I'm just going to grill him really for 20 minutes or so about the change house model. So John, you agreed to this. Let's take it away. Talk to us about the change house model. What is it? How does it work?
I suppose the big picture is, and one of the reasons I'm really happy to talk about the change house, is that there are many models out there, but I think this one, when sharing it with attendees and participants in training courses over the years, is the one that most immediately feels applicable to them, most immediately feels familiar to them in terms of a journey of change.
Mm-hmm.
So without putting to one side all the other models and sort of dissing them or anything like that, they're all great and they all have resonance in some way. But I have this sort of preference for sharing the journey of change personally and in business environments with others. And I think that's why it works for me, because it resonates with people better. So
what is it? Is it an actual house? Do they just call it that? Some of the model names are a little bit misleading.
Yeah. Klaus Janssen, a guy from Scandinavia in the 70s, and the model's been developed by one or two others since. So I won't give accreditations to everyone who's contributed to it, but it's a great model, and it's not a physical house, although when sharing it, many people will draw it, or I've seen it actually constructed on a floor in a hotel conference room once, where these guys got out a massive house and sort of built the house, and the house has effectively 4 rooms with 2 cellars and a couple of and a balcony and
it's a nice sounding house.
Yeah, so it's a nice simple house, 4 rooms, two cellar rooms, and an attic. And the attic's really important. The attic's really important. So we'll perhaps come back to that. I'll leave that dangling there, but we'll come back to the attic a bit later.
Dangle the attic to us.
Sorry?
You're gonna dangle the attic to us.
I'm dangling an attic. I think that's the first time I've ever dangled an attic in my career. So the change house model starts with sharing the fact that often as human beings, we many of us, not all of us, but many of us, much of the time, want to be in status quo. Not the 70s rock band, but the position of knowing what's going to happen, of being in the groove, of being in nice, friendly, familiar routine, where it's comfortable, it feels safe. We may have constructed that or contributed to the construct of this rhythms and routines of life. You get your real home, you get your kids, you get your school run, you've got your supermarket that you go to on a particular time, all of that, it feels familiar. It also allows you to be quite efficient. It allows the brain to settle down and concentrate on doing the things and enjoying the things that are in that status quo environment. And that would be called the room of contentment. Contentment. And I think most of us, pretty much all of us, would recognize where we've had periods in our lives that we may have worked hard to achieve that room of contentment, or it's formed around us and it's been a very sort of warm, familiar, comfortable place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes
we want to be in the room of contentment.
I think many of us, much of the time, are very happy to be there. Some people will want to be there a lot of the time, if not all of the time. Others will enjoy getting out of the contentment room and doing other things. And you will see change disturbers and such like going around, and that's fine. They're people that create change or make change happen or facilitate change in some way. But most of us, I think, really enjoy being in that room of contentment, and that's not a bad thing at all, until it comes to the time when we need to change. And change comes in 2 ways. Change is either chosen change or forced change. So chosen change, an example might be getting married. I think most of us, when we get married, we sort of choose to do it. It's
One
something
would
we go.
hope so.
Well, yeah, I always make a bit of a joke about that because there are, I think, maybe sometimes. Anyway, you'll make your own stories up on that one. But I think also things like moving home,
Hmm.
going from one abode to another. You sort of most of the time, not all the time, because maybe an agreement finishes or a contract finishes, and you're forced to move because there's no possibility of staying. But other times you choose to move, but maybe you want to get somewhere bigger or go to the country or go to the city or go higher or go lower. That's your choice. So sometimes there's real positive change that we move forwards as humans to do. And that forces us out of the room of contentment, if you like. But also there is forced change. Change happens upon us. And we wouldn't have chosen to do that change necessarily. We may not have even thought about that change necessarily, but now it's going to happen to us. And as
We've
humans,
seen a lot of that this year.
absolutely. So, of course, the direct reference here is COVID, pandemic, remote working, people of a certain age having to move totally digitally, not getting in your car, not going on holiday this year has been a challenge for, change for a lot of people. All sorts has happened in COVID that's just forced us, wearing masks when we go out, distancing, all sorts of things have happened that have been forced on us. And as that change comes towards us, we move. Janssen suggests that we move through a period of through a room that he calls the denial room. And classic evidence for someone in the denial room is, oh well, I'll carry on doing it as I'm doing it now. It probably won't happen. It probably won't affect me. It'll go away before it gets to me.
Right.
Okay. Or another classic denier will say, well, it affects everybody else, but it doesn't affect me. Or the other person, 5 minutes after the change has happened, I've seen this lots in business, 5 minutes after the change has happened, they say, I'm over it, I'm done, I'm through it. And actually they're not. They haven't.
No.
What they've done is they've stalled. Because the human brain's brilliant. It can take this big worry situation, because a lot of people worry about change, and squidge it down into a tiny little dot and tuck it away somewhere in the brain, so we don't have to face that issue right now because it's maybe too painful or too big or causes too much angst. Those are some classic areas of denial. And organizations go into denial as well. So, in the COVID scenario, something that affects us, particularly at the virtual training team, we want to, our mission is to help people to successfully move to virtual training delivery. And that's just one part of, many things that happen in a business. But many businesses have said to us, well, this COVID thing, we won't be in the office for a while, but we will all go back. Or
It'll end at some point.
It'll spring back to where it was. In other words, it'll go back to the contentment area, the status quo. Most people will come back. Yes, we'll go to one day, Fridays will be working from home day. And yet 2 years ago, I used to go on the train to London a lot to do in-person training back in the day. And I was seeing in my final years of doing that, particularly in the last couple of years, Fridays, on a Monday, you couldn't get a seat on the train that I used to go into London. And yet on a Friday, you could have a carriage to yourself, because many companies had just realized the value of allowing their colleagues to work from home. But still, some companies are still holding on to that old way. And even with this massive change of COVID, are still trying to say, yeah, we'll go back. And the truth is, they probably won't. And directors of companies are just not facing the fact they're going into denial. They're not facing the fact that they need to get through the denial, taking their organizations with them to get to the other side, to find their new normal. I know it's an oft-used phrase and everything else, but to get back to the contentment room and start building again. So
why do you think that they go into that denial? Is it a fear of the new? Do you think it's because people don't know what that future looks like, or because they're sort of harping back to the old way? The old way was safe, and so they just want to get back to that room of contentment as quickly as possible.
I think it's a good question, Abby. So I think my view, it's just my view, my experience. So I have one,
All
my
of this
slide.
is our view and our experience. We'll throw that disclaimer out there now. We're just talking through, aren't we?
So I've seen lots of people build lots of successful businesses, and they put their heart and soul and years, decades into those businesses, and they're very, very successful people. Some of them, other people build businesses sort of for a lifestyle approach, but they're still invested. So whether it's money you're chasing or a lifestyle you're chasing, you're still highly invested. You built it. You made the decisions. You made the mistakes. You carried the can. You took the stress. All that sort of stuff goes into the melting pot of building a business and having a business. And even for generations old businesses, or the Goliathan businesses around the world, the huge mega businesses, people are invested. They've built ways. And when you've built something, it's damned hard to break it apart and either rebuild it or throw that stuff in the bin. It's just so tough to rip something up that 2 years ago you thought was absolutely the right thing, and you spent 6 months building, and then to just literally tear it in half and throw it in the bin. It's a really tough thing to do. And we've at VTT, we've been through the same thing with our website. We went from one website to what we thought was going to be a website that we would have for quite some time, and then some significant things happened, and we had to pick it up, build a new one, and just drop our old one into the bin. And actually a lot of blood, sweat and tears went into that website, but it's still got to go in the bin. It's really tough to sort of say goodbye to stuff. So I think that's one of the reasons why businesses struggle. Also, people have done their planning. They've done their spreadsheets. They've got their numbers. They know the current way. They know how to manage the current way. I've watched lots of businesses grow, and as soon as they've grown to a particular point where the board think that's where we need to be, they lock it down. They get it secure, so they know the numbers. So if they're working on a calendar year, by September the year's done. They know exactly. They've got the surety. They're telling the shareholders and the people that research businesses, the analysts. They're able to tell them with surety and security that their numbers are done. That this business is a good business if you're investing, or if you're a director, you're a good director or a good board of directors, all that sort of stuff. They love that idea. And it's very difficult to go, well, no, we won't do that. What we'll do is something more exciting but more risky. And that's where your well-known entrepreneurs sort of come into their fore. So I think those are some of the reasons that existing businesses, and I understand, by the way, it's not a blame again. I really understand the lure of getting safe in a business, of building it right. We wanted to get to 10 million now, let's lock it down. We wanted to be a £100 million company, let's lock it down, let's make it secure. And then we'll do some risky stuff, a little bit off to the side. And that's what happens to a lot of businesses, in my humble opinion.
But no, it's a good point. It is a good point. And I can totally understand how, when you've put all of that work and effort in, and people like to feel safe and secure, especially the bigger business you get, and the more people you've got relying on you, both in customers and employees. So that risk becomes even greater, really. So it's no, surprise that they go into that denial phase of saying, no, I don't want things to change. I'm quite happy with the way they are. So, but as you say, sometimes we don't have the choice and the change gets thrust upon us. So, okay, so we've done...
Yeah, I was just going to say one more. You'll hear people say, it'll blow over. It'll blow.
I think we're still saying that about 2020. We're all hoping that it's going to end at some point.
Yeah, so one thing at this point that might be worth saying is that Janssen then describes that some people go into what he calls this lower room, the dungeon of denial. And I really like that idea, that some people get absolutely fixed and stuck in wanting to hold on to the old way, because that's part of it is the surety of the old way, and part of it is the fact I contributed to it, or I made decisions about it, and actually this change really jiggers their life, if you like, and puts them at great jeopardy. And I understand, and they go into what he calls the dungeon of denial, deep denial, deep fixed, heel in the ground. I remember watching. Years ago, I was in a hotel ironing a shirt before I was going to a business meeting or something, and I watched sport anytime on the telly, and it was it was international rope pulling. What's that called? You've got two teams and they're trying to get the rope and pull the other team, and these teams sort of settled in to do this rope pulling competition, and they dug their heels into the ground, and they got so entrenched that they couldn't be moved. Whatever the force pulling them, wouldn't move because they had heels stuck into the ground, and they brilliantly positioned themselves. And I thought, that's people in business sometimes. They dig their heels in so deep, they're in the dungeon of denial. They will not move, they're intransigent. And it's tough for people when they go into that room, because eventually the change will happen in most cases, and then it's going to be sometimes a much tougher journey for them. But then we move to the next room, which is where I think we were going next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so we've done contentment, we've done despair. Now the denial. We've gone into the dungeon. Where do we go next?
So, what Janssen then explains is that, and again, it's in my interpretation of his work, is that as we are displaying denial, this thing in here is clever thing, and the brain starts to realize that there's either an inevitability to the change happening, or there are attractions to the change, or other people around us are moving to the change, and we want to. Many of us as human beings, psychology will tell us that we want to be part of we want to be inside the gang, not outside the gang. All of us know how painful sometimes it can be to be excluded or external to the group. And if we see other people moving, we want to be part of that. It becomes very attractive for us, or more attractive, or the fear of missing out of that new future, or the fact that actually it's inevitability. And so we start gravitating towards. So what we'll start to do is sometimes grudgingly, sometimes more willingly, sometimes happily, start moving towards the change. And so we start to think about letting go of the past and cutting the ties, and then we start to move towards the future. But that takes us into the room that Janssen then calls the confusion room, the room of confusion. Okay. And so we had this new way, and it's a bit like me. I recently moved fully to Outlook in terms of email and calendar, particularly calendar, and we'd used G Suite before that. And I would say to people, I'm not an Outlook guy, because I understood new Gmail, but the fact is, for a number of reasons, we absolutely had to make that move. Who was the last person in the business to do it? Me. What happened when I did do it? I almost welcomed the confusion my brain went through. I played the bumbling idiot. I didn't get on the front foot. I had others pull me through, and I would make mistakes and get things wrong. And just as a small example, and we hit this whole area of confusion because it's a new way. We don't know what works quite. We haven't re-established the status quo, the smooth running of the machine, the repetitive nature of the calm that you get in the contentment room. Mm-hmm. You get this confusion. Also, what you do is get people sparking off in all sorts of different directions. So if you're in a business, people go, we're doing this new thing. Oh, it's that then, or it's that then, or it's that then. And then some people are still holding on to the past. And you've got this maelstrom of events happening. And that's what you would then describe as the confusion room. What also happens, Janssen suggests for some people, is that they might go into one of these lower rooms again, these cellar rooms, and the room here, he suggests, is the pit of paralysis.
Sounds fun.
Sorry?
Sounds fun.
I think this is absolutely the opposite of fun for a lot of people. When you get to paralysis, you don't know what to do. You don't know what to do. And I remember wandering around one business I worked in after a big change, and it was literally like there'd been a nuclear holocaust. People would just go, "Oh, I don't know. I don't." And these people were very experienced, long in the tooth, good operators. And yet, with significant change, they were like, the whole world has been tipped upside down. The change is sort of happening around them. They're out of control, or don't feel that they're in control. They're not making the decisions. people are running around them, and they just get into this paralysis, this absolutely, I do not know what to do, how to operate in this new way.
Does that come down to a sort of problematic transition then? Is that something that happens when it's not communicated properly, or is it more from just a personal perspective that happens? Like, how do they, one, why do they go in there, and two, how do they get out?
That's a really good and very long answer required. So I think in business, communicating change is often talked about. Communicating change in reality and done well is less familiar. I think change is poorly handled. We don't, I think in businesses and in training, we don't talk about successful change and examples of anywhere near enough. I worked on, I don't know how many change programs in the last 25 years, probably hundreds in one way or another. Saw some what I thought were very good changes, and some most not good, many really, really poor. Because leadership is key, comms is key. Yeah, there's hundreds of books out there and models that tell you how to do change. It's just that however many times people might read the books and understand the models, organizations and companies just get it wrong. They get it wrong. They don't spend anywhere near enough time planning. They don't spend anywhere near enough time engaging with people, the colleagues. They don't spend anywhere near enough time demonstrating progress. They don't spend anywhere near enough time learning lessons. And I could go on and on and on and on. So, and also for leadership to hold their nerve, because leaders see the first 3 or 4 get over the line, they declare victory. And then it's for them, it's, well, if 3 or 4 can get over the line, that's it, we've moved. I can tell the shareholders or the analysts or, whoever, actually you've got to do change until the last person's over the line. And you've got to walk around the business. You've got to be, whether it's digitally walk around the business or physically, given current conditions, that communication piece, that thank you piece, that reassurance piece, that describing the future piece, having that vision piece is all necessary in organizations, I think, and absolute diligence. And leaders almost ought to give up the day job when they're doing change and just become change leaders. And it's very, very tempting to, oh, I can't quite do that. I need other, the business wants me to do other things. Of course it does. But, if you've decided that the business needs to make a change, or it's been forced upon you for legislative or, pandemic reasons, then be that change leader until you've got your change in, and do it properly and help people get through confusion to the other side. Highlight good practice, highlight the right new behaviors. Share with people, talk, share story is another one that's so important. Just sharing those short stories that have impact, that help people understand what they're doing that's right and what they're doing that needs to be changed to be more effective. And so, and when you get that, you get people going, there's a doorway out of the confusion room, and it's the wrong direction door. So you get some people going, right, we're going off to do this, and they charge off, and they go, whoa, this is not very good. Or people realize they've made a terrible decision for one reason or another. So you get the wrong direction door, and you get the paralysis pit. And you said, how do people get into paralysis? Because they're frightened. There's massive jeopardy, maybe. They've never had to do it before in terms of making decisions about the new way. Maybe they've been promoted recently and never been in that position where they've had to embrace change and lead change at maybe junior or mid levels or even senior levels in business. And I think paralysis, sometimes it comes when there's 2 or 3 things connected in life that, if you're going through maybe a messy breakup in your relationship and there's a whole load of stuff kicking off at work, put those 2 together. Massive problem for people, paralysis pit. Tough to get out of. I think it's often someone else, again, so metaphorically holding your hand to pull you out, or encouraging you, or being patient with you, and sometimes it's just that thing of, recognizing that I can't stay here any longer. And I think psychologically, a lot of people that I've spoken to over the years have gone through change, personal change, negative change, really horrible, difficult change for them in their lives. There just comes a point where this thing says, I need to move.
I can't do this. We need to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I can't, am I going to stay here forever? And you do meet people who get into these dungeon of denial or pit of paralysis, and they just stay there forever. And you just think, well, what a shame, what a waste, and all the rest of it. But they do it for their own reasons, I guess. But most people go, at some point, I decided to X or Y, and that was the moment. You go, well, what made it happen? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. It just happened. And I think this thing called the mind, the brain, or whatever, the conscious, whatever the unconscious, it's just a clever old thing. And it's it's fallible in some ways, but it's a clever old thing. It just says to you, as a human, you're just better off moving. And so we go through the confusion room, we start to experiment, and then eventually we start to work things out. We move into the final room, except the attic, which is called the Renewal Room. So we work out the new way. It might not be beautiful and efficient and totally economic and effective at first, but we get the light of dawn comes on us, and things sort of start to settle down. People find their position and their place. And the team starts to cooperate again. If you're in business, people know sort of where they're sitting and what they're expected to do and how it contributes to an effective process in their part of the organization. And so we renew, we refresh, and then we sort of start to settle down, and we go into, eventually we start to work things out, and things get very thick, and we go back into the contentment room. Sometimes we get so content, and I didn't mention this earlier, that it gets so, you become so content as a human that you wander out of the lovely glass doors in the contentment room onto the balcony, and there's a sort of sun lounge balcony, and you get on your sunbed because the contentment sunshine is so warm and it's so perfect, it's so brilliant. And you sort of get you slip, slap, slop and all the rest of it in the sunshine of contentment, and you lie there and it's beautiful and it's fantastic, and that's called the sun lounge or the deck of whatever it's called, and it's wonderful. But when change comes along, that can hit you even harder because it's so perfect.
Yeah, of course. That rain coming to spoil your wonderful sun bathing.
Yeah, and you scrabble around to pick up your newspaper and your towel or your iPad or any other tablet. And you're running inside, and it's awful because the rain's really ruined your contentment. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's the journey through the 4 rooms. Now, what then has been built on is.
So tell us about the attic. Tell us about the attic. You dangled it in front of us for what, 10, 15 minutes now?
Yeah, sorry. So the attic. In the house. So when the first person that I met who introduced me to Janssen's model, when they're talking through it, they say, "Oh, well, the model you're looking at, John, it doesn't show you the attic space in terms of a descriptor for it." And I was curious, and the individual showed me another version of the model, and it had a descriptor in the attic space that said the attic of memory. And when they described to me, this fell into place for me so well and so strongly. So I've worked in many organisations, as I mentioned, but government organisations and public bodies and the Goliathans, and not all, but some of those organisations, some of those really have a strong sense, particularly when you have massively long servers. People who have almost been through like generations of being in an organization, you can see, you can hear evidence of the attic of memory. So you might be introducing to, there's this big change going on with I don't know, we're taking all the power from head office and we're sending it out to the regions, and I'm here as a consultant to help you, sort that out, and this, that, and the other. And the first thing you hear is, yeah, but we've seen all that before. 14 years ago, 17 years ago, 22 years ago, we did that same change, but since we've moved it back into head office, then we moved it out to so and so, and now we're doing this back. We're back to where we were 20 years ago. And that's someone displaying the attic of memory. So when we're going through change, because this thing kicks in again, and it makes reference points to every other change we've gone through. And if another change that was similar or the same was very painful for people, well, that memory is going to very much affect their level of engagement, their level of welcome, their level of willingness to go through the current change. So if you went through a program of taking power from head office and sending it out to the regions, and it was the most awfully run change program, it was 2 years of hell 20 years ago, you haven't forgotten that. So when somebody, a bright young spark, he or she comes along to, run a company and makes that similar change, you've got the attic of memory. And I think a lot of leaders don't recognize that. And I think we ought to be, if you're making change in organizations, you ought to be cognizant of the fact that many people have gone through many, many changes over a period of time, and they may well have gone through something similar. So we should not only recognize that, but we should talk about it, and we should take the lessons learned, and we should take things into account, and we should thank people for sharing that memory, and then be, as I say, sort of cognizant of it as we go through the change. But no, you might look at something and go, well, this individual, they went through the last change brilliantly, but they're just really dragging their feet on this change. Why is that? They're really hanging around in denial. Why? Normally, that person would just charge through change. I can rely on them to drive change. And look at why is it not happening? Attic of memory. Go and chat to them. There'll be something that's holding them back because they've gone through something. Why. Yeah.
Is it always a negative thing, or would you say that the attic of memory can be a positive thing as well, in terms of if they had experienced a similar change that went really, really well, would that give them the energy and reinvigorate them to charge into this new change as well?
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. The thing is, though, about change for most change leaders in organizations, is if you see someone who's embracing the change, you tend not to spend a lot of time asking them why they're embracing the change.
You just accept it and move on.
You've got them on side, they're not a problem. Lots of leaders just look at their problems. And there are many people in change who will just accept change. There are some that will grab the flag of change and charge forwards onto the battlefield of change and all that sort of stuff, any metaphors or analogies you can think of. But what leaders tend to look at is their problems, and they should, but they should also remember to spend good time with those that are, yes, holding the flag for change, and secondly, those people who are accepting of change, who are not resisting it, but they're not running around going eureka, and engage them and thank them and show them I mentioned this already, but show them progress. Yeah. Help them and reinforce good behaviors and
it's all going to help in, isn't it? Because if you can get people on side with the change, even if they are carrying that flag in, if they can help you get the people who are dragging their heels on board as well, then the whole thing is going to transition much more smoothly.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you get leaders that go, hey, I've done such a good job of explaining the change that, Roy or, Deepak or whoever it is, they're charging off on change because I did this amazing, stand at the front of the room and did this big rah-rah. It must be me that's got them really, really. It's not. It's the attic of memory. People go, this is brilliant. There's opportunity for me here. And in my career, in my corporate career, I know I lost out sometimes because I didn't embrace change. I put the bin lid over the top of my head, hunkered down, let all the change kick off. Other people went and grabbed to the future, and I didn't on occasions. And I think I lost out for that, in truth. So attic of memory, there was, if I could spend the time to go back far enough and think about that and think it through, I think I would find that, some of those changes were very frightening to me. And because of that, the memories I had at that time in my career. So I think, that's the final thing to have in mind. And we can apply all of this to the current COVID pandemic environment of people having to work and operate differently, of all the personal relationships and family things that have gone on, all the relative hardship that people have had to go through in very uncertain, very regularly changing times. And when you go through a lot of change very quickly, it becomes very tiring for many people. So I think that's something also to bear in mind. And in 10 years' time, when the next pandemic comes along, just think of the attic of memory that people will hold from the 2020 saga that we went through.
Absolutely.
You'll see it all played out again. So, yeah, there's some thoughts for you on the change house, just from my perspective.
No, it's all very useful. Admittedly, as someone who is quite resistant to change, change scares me. I'm not a big change person. I like to sit in the room of contentment. I like things to stay the way that they are and how I know the way they work. I don't like to be plunged into the new ways of doing things. But I find that using the change house is quite helpful because it allows me to have that reflective time to say, oh, okay, so at the moment I'm in the room of confusion, like I don't really know where I'm going. I don't want to end up in the pit of paralysis. So yeah, how do I work with this? So I think the change house is really quite a useful model when it comes to people working out where they are at the moment. It gives them that way of planning their way forward. So as much as I agree with you in that I think managers need to have bigger and more in-depth conversations with their employees around change, I think it would be helpful for, I mean, anybody listening to this in particular, if you can identify where you are and then where the area of support you need, it allows you to meet your manager in the middle to have that conversation. And then hopefully the change will be a lot smoother for everyone involved.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things there, Abby. I think yes, I recognise your scenario that you are sort of a classic person that likes to be in that contentment room and not get it disturbed. And as soon as you're pushed out of it, you want to get round the rooms and get back into that room very quickly. Is that fair to say?
As quickly as possible, yeah.
Right. So. You know, as a manager or a leader of change, I think again, it's a clever thing or it's a smart thing to work out around you in your close team how you need to be framing and using language to help that individual work through the change, and it might vary for different people. I also think that we don't get through change and reflect in organizations enough. And I think from time to time, I used to have one boss who this is my action, he didn't do what he would do is affect what I would call a wash up. You know, you get to the end of something and then you pull people who are involved or affected back together only for a short period of time and say, okay, let's just take a breather, half an hour, a day, whatever it is, and let's just look back. And actually, what were the lessons that we learned, so that when we go through something similar, we've got a record, we've got some learning, we've recognized the mistakes and the successes, and let's take that into account in our planning for the next change. And I think that's a mark of someone, you know, skillful, who can, you know, take the time, hold their nerve to look back, recognize before moving on. I think that's really, really important. And I'll just finish, if I may, with 4 words. So years ago, I now realise that I share stories about people who unfortunately have been passed away from some time, and people of your age, Abby, have no clue who I'm talking about. So their name is sort of irrelevant, but their stories live on through people like me. So there was one agony aunt, and she shared a story on a radio interview once. And she said her father said to her, you know, these are going to give you a gift, 4 words, the most important 4 words that you'll ever have as a mother, as an individual going through life. And he said, then she said, well, he told me the 4 words, this too will pass. And, you know, in every change, eventually it will pass. It will come to fruition. It will come to the end, and we will move on, and we will survive as humans in organizations, in our personal lives. We sort of survive. And so always, however tough it gets in change, and I did a sort of 30-day project recently, and I got about 20 days in. I thought, will this ever finish? It was just like being in a dark tunnel forever. And then I just remember her words, and it said, this too will pass. There will come a time when the change is done and through, and we get back into contentment for a period of time. So always, for me, for you, perhaps for everyone else, just have those 4 words in mind. This too will pass. It will.
This too will pass. I will take those as our motto for the rest of 2020, I think. For the
Good.
time
There's not much
being.
more of it to go, but
Yes, thankfully.
yeah,
Well,
it's been.
I'd say that quite happily concludes us then on our Change House chat. Thank you anyone for listening. We'll be doing more podcasts just like this with different models going into the future. Thank you, John, for your time and sharing your expertise, and we will see you next time.
Pleasure. Lovely talking to you as always. And Merry Christmas, because I think there's time coming up, and Happy New Year, and see you in 2021.
See you in 2021.